Hi, my name is Sasha Nosov. I'm a program manager with the Azure Data team at Microsoft. In this session, I will introduce you to a new service we recently released for public preview called Azure Arc Enabled SQL Server. Let's start with a brief refresher of what Azure Arc is all about. At the high level, it's essentially three use cases. Number one, Azure Arc extends the management capabilities to different servers and applications outside of Azure. Hosted in your data center using any cloud infrastructure. With Arc, you can use Azure Portal as the central management dashboard of your connected applications, regardless of what hosting infrastructure they use and where in the world they run. Number two, it allows you to use or adopt the cloud-style best practices and management capabilities within your compliance boundary. By deploying an application to Kubernetes and connecting it to Azure, you can enable cloud-like operations inside of your secure environment. For example, Azure Data Services based on Kubernetes operate a PaaS-like data service on any infrastructure outside of Azure, where Kubernetes can be run. And finally, it allows you to leverage some of the Azure services that are applicable to your existing applications and service, such as security. That way, you don't have to change or impact in any way the existing solutions running in production while still adding value to them from Azure innovations. Now let's look at the specific benefits that Azure Arc brings to your SQL Server. By connecting your existing SQL Server instance and a hosting machine to Azure Arc, you will register your SQL Server instance as an ARM resource and therefore can leverage the power of Azure Graph. For example, you can create a global service map of SQL applications, generate insights of their usage patterns, calculate the license requirements to stay compliant. All combined can be used, for example, to map your migration and modernization strategy. The other powerful benefit is the ability to protect your SQL Server instances using the power of Azure Defender. It will provide the vulnerability assessment of your setup, enable advanced threat protection of your database application, and finally, will allow you to trace the attackers using Azure Sentinel service. As a result, you can greatly improve your security posture without changing the application itself. Finally, you can periodically scan your SQL Server configuration with SQL Assessment to evaluate its health and generate personalized report with actionable remediation steps for each detected violations of the best practices. Note, until Azure Arc enabled SQL Server release, SQL Assessment was only available to customers with Premier Services Agreement. It involved a pretty complicated and time-consuming enrollment process. Now, any professional customer in just a few clicks can start using it once SQL Server is connected to Azure Arc. Now, let's take a deeper look into how the Arc-enabled SQL Server actually works. As I mentioned, this service targets the existing database applications powered by SQL Server. There are millions of such applications deployed around the globe on virtual machines or on bare metal servers. We want to make sure they can leverage the Azure services regardless of where these applications are deployed. Obviously, the preferred way to leverage the power of Azure is by moving the entire application to it. But we also realize that in some cases such migration is not an option. Our customers need the flexibility of choosing their hosting infrastructure because of the compliance rules, data governance requirements, strategic partnerships, etc. Yet, you can still bring the power of Azure to these applications. This slide shows a high-level architecture of Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server. At the bottom is the infrastructure layer and a virtualization solution. For example, it could be your own data center, AWS Cloud, Google Cloud Platform, or any other hosting platform. The virtual or physical machine that runs SQL Server can have one or more SQL Server instances, even running different versions of SQL Server. That's perfectly fine. These instances is what we want to make better by leveraging Azure. At the top are the specific Azure services that we leverage for SQL servers to bring all that additional value. So let's walk through the process of onboarding your SQL Server to Azure Arc. As the first step, you will go to Azure Portal, select SQL Server Azure Arc Service, and go through the creation flow, just like any other Azure resource. All you need to do is provide your Azure subscription resource group and the connectivity method that you would like to use during the onboarding. You can choose between a direct outbound connection to Azure HTTP proxy server or using a private link. The flow will create the onboarding script. Once completed, you can download that script to your client machine and then bring it to a server in your secure environment. You then can run the onboarding script either interactively from the target machine or as an unattended process to connect multiple machines at scale. If you are using a virtual machine manager, such as Hyper-V or VMware, we recommend that the script is run automatically for each newly created virtual machine. The script will automatically install the guest configuration agent, which in turn connects the machine to Azure, registers it as an Azure resource, and starts periodically checking for SQL Server instance presence. This way, both existing and future SQL Server instances are detected and registered with Azure automatically. Now your machine is set up to take full advantage of Azure policies for identity management, RBAC, deployment, and configuration management. The rest of the configuration actions are fully automated. To achieve such automation, we leverage Azure Policy. Policy is a powerful method of taking various management actions at scale. So we use the policies to initiate the deployment of additional agents as necessary, again, to achieve that automation I mentioned earlier. One of the policies controls installation of SQL Server extension when an instance of SQL Server is running. The extension will register the discovered instance with Azure, adding it to the SQL Server inventory. The other policy will ensure that any machine registered with Azure Arc will have the monitoring agent installed. It will activate the data collection and uploading the data to the log analytics service. Azure Defender, Azure Sentinel, and other services use these data to protect your SQL servers from security attacks, detect vulnerabilities, performance degradations, and make sure that the SQL Server configuration complies with the best practices. Now let's switch to the demo mode. I'd like to show you how you can leverage Azure Defender to protect an Arc-enabled SQL Server running in your own infrastructure. Here I have a SQL Server installed on premises and connected to Azure Arc. Each connected SQL Server instance will show up in the portal as a resource of type SQL Server Azure Arc, as you can see here. When you open such a resource, you will see the standard information about the resource itself, such as resource group, region, and subscription. But you will also see the basic information about the specific SQL Server instance itself, such as version, edition, operating system, and a number of cores used by the instance. The security heading on the left is the entry point to the integrated experience with Azure Defender. It is a very similar report that you will generate if you were to run your SQL Server instance on Azure itself. As you can see, that report consists of two sections. One of the recommendations, and the other one is security incidents and alerts. So on the list of recommendations, the first one is vulnerability assessment findings. What happens is Azure Defender for SQL continuously runs a set of security checks against protected SQL Server. It reports a list of findings upon discovery of security misconfigurations, excessive permissions, or unprotected sensitive data. So let's click on that particular recommendation and look at the list of findings. A couple of them are very common. SA login is enabled and it should be disabled, and command shell also should be disabled. Those are very common misconfiguration that could be potentially exploited by the attackers. If you click on that SA login should be disabled finding, you will see additional details about this vulnerability, descriptions, the remediation, the impact of that vulnerability, and even the specific query that you need to run to fix that vulnerability. Now back to the security page, main security page, and take a look at the security incidents and alerts. As you can see, one of them is potential brute force attempt that has been detected. By clicking on that alert, you will see a couple of things. One is it will show you the environment which has been attacked, the specific machine, which team owns it, and whether this is a production environment or not. In this particular case, it's production, so obviously this attack is extremely severe incident. On the right-hand side, you will see the specific details about the attack itself. For example, it shows you the client IP address from where the attack came. It shows how many failed logins have been detected as part of this attack. And it offers you to take actions. When you click on it, it will give you the specific ways to mitigate the threat. For example, it tells you to block this IP address of the attacking client. It also says that you should disable SA. If for whatever reason you cannot disable it, at very least you should use strong password and avoid reusing it across multiple databases. So those are the recommendation and the information that Azure Defender provides you to protect your SQL Server instances. But we do not stop there. You see, Azure Defender is also integrated with Azure Sentinel, which means the security operations team can also see that security incident using their central dashboard. This is what Azure Sentinel is. It's a central dashboard for the security operations team. So the team can choose to further investigate that particular attack by using the advanced investigation tools. Now, the team can explore the host entity in the Sentinel's investigation graph and can notice that there are additional security incidents on this SQL server that indicate a popular attack has occurred. By going through the timeline, you can see the sequence of the malicious activities that were detected, which indicate that the attacker has gained this initial access through the brute force attack and managed to leverage that vulnerability we discovered by the vulnerability assessment, the fact that command shell is enabled. So basically the attacker exploited it and managed to run a malicious script on the Windows machine that launched a crypto miner. So the whole point of this attack was basically using SQL Server as a means of getting access to the compute power of this VM and use it for mining cryptocurrencies. That is the end of the security demo. Thank you for watching. Now let's go back to the presentation. For some years, Microsoft Azure has been offering several different deployment and management choices for hosting SQL Server applications on Azure. With the release of the Azure Arc support for SQL Server, the range of different options has grown even further. I want to spend a few minutes to help make sense of these different options and explain their relationships. As you know, Azure offers both infrastructure as a service and platform as a service options. The IaaS category targets the applications that cannot be changed because of the SQL version dependency, ISV certification, simply because the lack of in-house expertise to modernize. The PaaS category targets the application that will benefit from modernization by leveraging the latest SQL features, gaining a better SLA, and reducing the management complexity. In the IaaS category, Azure offers SQL Server on Azure VMs. It allows you to run SQL Server applications inside of a fully managed virtual machine. It is best for lift and shift ready applications that would benefit from rehosting to the cloud without any changes. You will maintain the full administrative control over the application's lifecycle, the database engine, and the underlying OS. On the Arc side, we have Azure Arc-enabled SQL Server, which is designed for the SQL Server running in your own infrastructure or hosted on another public cloud. It mirrors the capabilities of SQL Server in virtual machines on Azure. So you can think of this choice as an IaaS-like option. You can enable the Azure services for it without moving the databases and workloads to Azure. In the platform as a service category, Azure includes two offers. Azure SQL Managed Instance is designed for new applications or existing on-premises applications that want to migrate to the cloud with minimal changes to use the latest stable SQL Server features. This option provides all of the past benefits of Azure SQL Database, but adds capabilities such as native virtual network, near 100% compatibility with on-premises SQL Server. Instances of SQL Managed Instance provide full access to the database engine and feature compatibility for migrating SQL servers, but do not offer admin access to the underlying OS. Azure SQL Managed Instance includes a 99.99% availability SLA. Azure SQL Database is a relational database as a service. It's DBAS, hosted in Azure. It supports elastic pools of databases, serverless option where you can pay only while the application uses compute, and a hyperscale service option to scale out compute and storage independently. It is optimized for building modern cloud applications using a fully managed SQL Server database. On the Arc side, we have Azure Arc-enabled SQL Managed Instance. It is available as part of the Azure Data Services service based on Kubernetes. And it's designed to provide the existing SQL Server application an option to migrate to an evergreen version of the SQL Server engine and a fully managed platform while using the existing infrastructure. It allows the customers to maintain the data sovereignty and meet other compliance criteria. You can think of this option as a PaaS-like choice that mirrors the capabilities of Azure SQL Managed Instance. I hope this mapping makes sense and will help you in your future modernization and migration planning. Now let's recap. As I showed, there are clear benefits that Azure Arc brings to your on-premises applications. You can benefit regardless of the operating system or the versions of the SQL Server you are running. You can connect to Azure using a range of connectivity options to satisfy your specific network security requirements. And best of all, you don't need to migrate your application. You don't even need to suspend it in order to start getting the benefits of Azure Arc. So there is no reason to wait. Start using it today. Well, this is the end of this short session. Remember, there are 3 ways you can win prizes. You can post your selfie, you can give the feedback, or you can visit our sponsors or exhibitors. And please, follow us on Twitter. Thank you for watching.